Welcome back. Welcome to Through a Glass Darkly Radio. You're listening to us on United Public Radio, and the intro song was Mark of the Doomslayer by Karl Casey at White Bat Audio. It's a great YouTube channel with amazing music that Karl Casey is constantly producing. All right, so this is a pre-recorded broadcast. I'm actually recording it before the Witches episode, which I will record tonight, but I have to be somewhere on Saturday night, so I unfortunately have to do a pre-record. But I think I have enough material to carry me through for the full 2 hours. At least I hope. At least for this episode. For tonight's episode, not so much. So I almost tried to do them as a combined episode, but it wasn't gonna work out. It was too long. So just a disclaimer that I always say, the research that I did for this was AI generated. So if you're not into that, if you don't support that or whatever, I understand. This is the only content when it comes to the writing that I have AI generate. Nothing else that I generate, well, some descriptions I might use AI to just quickly get it out, and I might use some help with titles and things like that just to speed things up. But in my professional kind of fiction writing, I do not touch AI. I just don't touch it. But for this, anyway, just full disclosure, I don't want people thinking that I wrote all this stuff, because I came up with the ideas, but that's about it. In terms of what we're going to cover tonight, so I might as well just get straight to it. We're going to cover Celtic witchcraft because I'm interested in learning more about it and seeing what it brings. So with that, shall we get started? Celtic witchcraft, a comprehensive exploration. Historical Celtic practices, Druids and pre-Christian Celtic society. In Iron Age Celtic societies of Gaul and the British Isles, religion and magic were guided by a professional priestly class, most famously the Druids, along with bards and seers. Classical sources describe a threefold hierarchy: the Druids, priests and judges; the Vates, or Philida, who are seers, basically; and the bards, strumming guitars and whatnot. Druids held esteemed positions as religious leaders, legal authorities, and keepers of knowledge. The very name Druid likely means knowing the oak tree, reflecting the sacred role of oak groves in their rites. Indeed, early Celts did not build temples. Rituals were performed in sacred groves deep in forests. Druids avoided manual labor and paid no taxes, privileges that attracted many to train in Druidic arts. Novices underwent up to 20 years of oral instruction, memorizing extensive lore, since Druids forbade writing down their teachings. That's kind of annoying and short-sighted, but who knows? Celtic religious practice was closely tied to nature and the land. Sacred rites included Nemeda, which is cleared groves and forests, rivers, springs, lakes, hilltops, and even individual ancient trees, especially mighty oaks, which were seen as meeting places of the physical and supernatural worlds. Druids reverenced mistletoe and oak above all. Pliny the Elder recounts how white-robed Druids would cut mistletoe from an oak with a golden sickle in a special ceremony, never letting it touch the ground. 2 white bulls would then be sacrificed as part of this fertility rite, illustrating the sacred status of these plants and animals in Celtic ritual. Such rituals were timed by natural cycles. For instance, Pliny notes the mistletoe rite took place on the 6th day of the waxing moon. Beliefs in the other world and afterlife pervaded Celtic tradition. Celts buried weapons, food, ornament, and tools with their dead, indicating a belief that the soul lives on in another realm. The Druids taught a doctrine of the soul's immortality and transmigration after death. Irish myth described an other world variously as the land of the young or delightful plain, a place without sickness or old age, where happiness lasted forever. Such beliefs gave courage to warriors and were noted by classical writers like Julius Caesar. Archaeology confirms that afterlife beliefs were strong. Elite burials contained chariots, feasting vessels, weapons, and luxury goods, presumably to be used by the deceased in the next world. Celtic religion was polytheistic and highly ritualistic. Offerings to the gods were common, from food and crafted valuables to animal sacrifices. Many precious items discovered in rivers and bogs, so for instance, swords, cauldrons, ornaments deliberately broken or thrown into water, are interpreted as votive offerings meant to thank or appease deities. Seasonal feasting accompanied sacrifices. For example, bones of oxen and other animals show that part of a sacrificial animal was eaten by participants and the rest given to the gods. Though rarer, human sacrifice was reported in Gaul and Britain by Roman sources, possibly in times of great crisis. Roman writers even ascribed different sacrificial methods to different Celtic gods. For instance, drowning for Toidates, hanging and dismemberment for Isis, burning alive in a wicker effigy for Tyrannus. While colored by outsider perspective, these accounts align with archaeological finds like the Lindoman bog body in England, who died by blows, strangling, and throat cutting, a pattern suggestive of ritual execution. Magic was interwoven with religion in daily Celtic life. Druids were not only priests, but also lore masters, healers, and diviners. They observed natural phenomena to predict events, bird flight patterns, weather signs, etc., and performed soothsaying, especially during sacrifices, scrutinizing the victim's death throes, blood flow, or entrails for omens. In Irish tradition, the concept of a gais, or gaeza, exemplified Celtic magic. A gais was a magical taboo or injunction placed upon a person, forbidding certain actions or demanding certain quests. Heroes in myth, like Cuchulainn, had geasa that could grant power or doom depending on whether they were kept or broken. These binding spells ensured social compliance or propelled epic deeds. Druids were believed capable of casting such mantic charms, as well as blessings or curses through the power of spoken word and poetry. In fact, Celtic bards' satirical verses were feared as potent curses. A harsh satire could raise boils on a king's face, undermining his right to rule, according to Irish saga. The Druids' toolkit for magic and ritual included sacred plants and objects. Mistletoe, called All Healer, was believed to cure poisons and infertility when prepared as a potion. Druids gathered herbs with elaborate rituals, for instance, using a ritual posture or a special tool to cut plants to avoid offending the plant spirits. Such practices were intended to harness nature's power without angering it. A druid's staff or wand, often of yew or yoke, is frequently mentioned in tales as a focus of power. The oak and mistletoe ceremony itself used a golden sickle as a ritual tool, highlighting how metallurgy and magic merged in Celtic practice. Mythic narratives speak of magical items. The 4 treasures of Tuatha De Danann in Irish lore, including Dagna's cauldron, which never ran empty and could feed all, a powerful symbol of abundance and rebirth. Such cauldrons were central to Celtic myth and later folklore. For instance, the cauldron of inspiration, owned by the goddess Ceridwen, or the cauldron of rebirth in Welsh legend. Other legendary tools include Lug's spear, said to guarantee victory, and Nuada's sword, underlining how weaponry and magic were linked in Celtic imagination. Overall, pre-Christian Celtic practices present a picture of a holistic cosmology, the tribal community, the natural world, and the divine, all bound by rituals overseen by druids. The Celts marked time by sacred festivals, revered nature as animate and ensouled, and saw no sharp divide between magic and religion. Both were parts of honoring the gods and maintaining harmony in the land. This rich heritage forms the foundation upon which modern Celtic witchcraft revivals have drawn. Now let's move on to the revival and reconstruction movements. From Druid revival to Celtic Wicca. After centuries of dormancy following Christianization, Celtic spiritual traditions experienced a resurgence through modern pagan movements. Neo-Druidism began as early as the 18th century, Romantic era, where antiquarians and poets in Britain, like Io Morganwg in Wales, I completely butchered that name, glorified the ancient Druids and sought to recreate their practices. These early revival Druid orders, so for instance, the ancient Druid order founded in the 1700s, had scant historical information to work with, so they often wove fantasy and Masonic-style ritual into their rites. By the 20th century, Neo-Druidism had proliferated into organized groups such as the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, OBOD, O-B-O-D, founded in 1964, and R. Nactrochai Féin, it's Gaelic, I can't pronounce it, ADF, founded in 1983. Modern Druidry generally emphasizes nature veneration, harmony, creativity, and a quest to connect with the spirit of the land and Celtic ancestors. It is not a direct continuation of Iron Age Druidism. Indeed, scholars note the modern movement has no historical continuity with ancient Druids aside from inspiration. Yet Neo-Druid orders have built rich new traditions, incorporating Celtic mythology, seasonal festivals, and often a philosophical rather than dogmatic approach. Some groups identify as religious, others as cultural or spiritual philosophy. Around the same time, Wicca, a modern witchcraft religion emerging in the 1940s to 50s, became another vehicle for a Celtic-themed revival. Celtic Wicca is a branch of Wicca that blends the standard Wiccan framework with deities and symbols from Celtic lore. Like other Wiccans, Celtic Wiccans worship a moon goddess and horned god, celebrate 8 Sabbats, and cast circles. But they overlay these practices with Celtic names and mythologies. For instance, a Celtic Wiccan coven might invoke Brigid or Lug in their rituals and refer to the Sabbats by Gaelic names, Samhain, Imbolc, etc., all while following Wiccan ritual structure. It's important to note that Celtic Wicca is eclectic and modern. It uses Celtic pantheons and festival lore within a fundamentally Wiccan framework rather than a historically Celtic one. As one source summarizes, Celtic Wiccans employ the same basic theology, rituals, and beliefs as other Wiccans, but incorporate Celtic deities, mythic figures, and seasonal festivals into that system. In practice, Celtic Wicca often emphasizes nature magic, elemental spirits, and healing. An overview of Wiccan traditions notes that Celtic Wicca deeply venerates nature and the ancient ones, focusing on the magical properties of plants, stones, the fae, or fairies, and gnome-like earth spirits. This reflects a romantic vision of the Celts as especially earth-centered and fairy-friendly. However, Celtic Wicca's authenticity is sometimes questioned by reconstructionists, since it does not strictly recreate ancient Celtic religion, but rather draws inspiration from it. Reconstructionist Celtic paganism. Contrasting with the eclectic revivals is the movement known as Celtic Reconstructionist paganism, or CR. Arising in the 1980s and 1990s, CR pagans strive for historical accuracy and cultural specificity in reviving Celtic polytheism. Rather than following the Wiccan model, Reconstructionists go back to primary sources: Iron Age archaeology, medieval Irish Welsh texts, folklore, etc., to piece together authentic Celtic rituals and beliefs. They practice polytheistic worship of Celtic gods, often focusing on one regional pantheon, such as Irish or Gaulish, and make offerings to spirits and ancestors as historically attested. Daily life is sometimes imbued with reconstructed rites, hearth prayers, seasonal customs, etc., and even the Gaelic or Brythonic languages are studied and used in ritual to deepen the cultural connection. Celtic Reconstructionists distance themselves from the more eclectic Celtic Wicca style. They tend not to use Wiccan style circle casting or duotheism, and instead aim to recreate the old Celtic worship as faithfully as possible in a modern context. This can include celebrating the four fire festivals or on their traditional dates, giving votive offerings to local rivers or land spirits, and reconstructing divination methods described in lore. While Celtic neo-paganism is an umbrella covering many approaches, the spectrum often ranges from the eclectic, which blends Celtic themes with other pagan or New Age elements, to the Reconstructionists, which are historically informed. Some groups like ADF take a middle path. They are neo-Druidic, but encourage scholarship and authentic Celtic cultural focus in their liturgy. Additionally, there are other revival threads, such as Celtic neo-shamanism, which mixes Celtic imagery with core shamanic principles. So, for instance, spirit journeys to the other world guided by figures like Celtic animal totems. Neo-shamans might invoke Celtic gods or the Sidhe, fairy folk, in healing ceremonies or drumming circles, though critics note this often relies on generalized shamanic techniques rather than historical Celtic ritual. There are also folkloric witchcraft revivals in Celtic regions, for instance, practitioners in Ireland or Scotland reviving the charms and cures of local cunning folk, calling this Celtic witchcraft. These tend to be individualistic folk-based practices using prayers, herbs, and folk magic passed down through families or collected by folklorists. Despite their differences, all these modern movements share a common motivation: to tap into the spiritual heritage of the Celts. Whether through scholarly reconstruction or creative adaptation, modern pagans have brought Celtic gods, festivals, and magical practices into contemporary life. Celtic witchcraft, broadly speaking, can refer to any of these paths where people identify as witches or pagans working within a Celtic spiritual paradigm. Some are initiatory, like lineage British traditional Wicca and a Celtic flavor, or with a Celtic flavor. Others are completely eclectic and personal. The revival has also been fueled by literature and media, for example, the Celtic Twilight writings of W.B. Yeats and others around the turn of the 20th century, and later the works of authors like Marion Green or D.J. Conway, who wrote Celtic magic and Celtic Wicca books. These popular works, while not always historically accurate, introduce many seekers to the idea of practicing magic in a Celtic context. In summary, the Celtic spiritual revival spans a continuum, from neo-Druid orders focused on nature spirituality to Wiccan-style covens invoking Celtic goddesses to Reconstructionist polytheists building Celtic religion from the ground up. Each contributes to the modern understanding of Celtic witchcraft, ensuring that the Celtic legacy of druids, gods, and enchantments continues to evolve in the present day. Deities, symbols, and festivals, the Celtic gods and goddesses. The ancient Celts worshipped a pantheon of many gods and goddesses. Though unlike the Greek or Norse, they left no writing methodologies to catalog their deities. Our knowledge comes from Roman commentators and later folklore. It appears that Celtic deities varied by region and tribe, with over 300 gods known from inscriptions, many being local spirits. Yet certain major gods were widely revered across Celtic lands. One prominent example is Lugus, known in Irish as Lug and in Welsh as Lu Law Gifs, a god of light, the sun, and skilled arts. Julius Caesar observed that the Gauls worshipped a deity he equated to Mercury above all, and many scholars believe this was Lugus Lug, an all-wise, all-seeing god of many talents. Lug's festival, Lugnasad, in August, was celebrated in Ireland in honor of his foster mother, suggesting his importance as a harvest and sovereignty deity. Another pan-Celtic figure is the mysterious Cernunnos, the horned god. Depicted with antlers and often seated in meditation, Cernunnos appears on the 1st century BCE Gundestrup cauldron among animals and holding a torque. He is interpreted as a god of wild nature, animals, and possibly fertility or the underworld. The Celts gave many of their gods natural associations. For example, Tyrannus was the thunder god, his name literally meaning thunderer, and was worshipped with wheels or by venerating oak trees struck by lightning. Sullus was a god of hot springs, syncretized with Roman Minerva at Bath. And Epona was the widely revered horse goddess, protectress of cavalry and fertility, whom the Romans adopted into their own pantheon. In insular Irish and Welsh mythology recorded later, many gods appear as heroic figures or kings. The Irish Tuathana de Danann, tribe of the goddess Danu, are essentially the Irish pantheon, including Dagda, the great father god of abundance and druidry. Brigid, goddess of healing, poetry, and smithcraft. Nuada, a warrior king with a silver hand. The Moradin, a tripartite battle goddess, and others. These figures correspond to aspects of nature and culture. Brigid, for instance, was so beloved as a bringer of healing and spring that she was syncretized into Saint Brigid in Christian times. The Dagda is portrayed as a hardy, wise chieftain who could revive the dead and command the seasons. He owned a bottomless cauldron of plenty and a harp that could change the seasons, symbolizing his mastery over life's cycles. The Morrigan, great queen, often appeared as a crow on the battlefield and granted victory or doom, exemplifying the Celtic notion of a sovereignty goddess who embodies the land and destiny. In Welsh tradition, we find the children of Don and children of Lear, two divine families in the Mabinogian tales. Sorry. For instance, Rhiannon, likely cognate with the continental horse goddess Epona, is a queen of the underworld in Welsh lore associated with birds and horses. Aran is a lord of the underworld. And gods like Math, Gwydion, and Arianrhod appear in mythic narratives with magical powers. Many Welsh deities have parallels to the Irish ones. For instance, the craftsman god Goimnu in Irish is mirrored by Gofanan in Welsh, both cognate to Gaulish Gobanos. Such parallels hint at a common origin in Proto-Celtic religion. Common to Celtic belief was that gods often had multiple aspects or names. They were not neatly delineated like the Greek Olympians. Instead, many deities overlap in functions. So multiple mother goddesses, several war goddesses, etc. Celtic gods were all-embracing in their powers with fluid identities. Goddesses in particular were numerous and often associated with local features. Rivers, tribes, or sovereignty of the land. So like Boann of the River Boyne or Sakana of the Seine. A recurring figure is the sovereignty goddess, a feminine deity who personifies the land's fertility and who grants kingship. In myth, she often appears as a hag who transforms into a young maiden when the rightful hero or king accepts her, as in the stories of Niamh or the Loathly Lady motif. The Celts also honored many matronae, or mother goddesses depicted in triplets, and genius loci, or spirits of the place in Latin. These goddesses and gods could be very localized. For instance, every notable spring had its own guardian spirit. In Celtic towns like Lugdunum or Leon were named after gods, Lugus in this case. Interestingly, Celtic deities were often associated with animals and sometimes depicted in animal form. So, zoomorphic deities. The horned Cernunnos with his stag antlers is one example. The Morrigan, as mentioned, takes the shape of a raven or crow in the battlefield. Another is the figure of Tarvas Trigeranus, the bull with three cranes, shown in Gaulish reliefs, possibly representing a nature spirit or myth where a bull and birds feature prominently. The Celtic horse goddess Epona was literally envisioned as either a woman riding a mare or sometimes as a mare herself. Boars were sacred in Celtic culture too. Images of boars appear on helmets and carvings as symbols of strength and courage, possibly linked to a boar god. The Irish legend of the divine boar, Tuairc Tuath, is an example of a mythic animal hunt. Serpents and dragons appear in later Welsh lore, the red and white dragons fighting in the Mabinogion, while birds, especially ravens, swans, and eagles, act as divine messengers or forms of deities. This close identification with animals reflects the animistic streak of Celtic belief. Gods manifested in nature's creatures, and each species carried nature's meaning. Celtic witchcraft and spirituality make rich use of symbols. Sorry, let me step back. Sacred symbols and cosmology. Celtic witchcraft and spirituality make rich use of symbols, many drawn from ancient Celtic art and cosmology. A fundamental motif is triplicity. The Celts loved things in threes, reflecting a worldview that often divided reality into three realms or functions. One famous symbol is the Trixkel, or the Trixkelion, three interlocking spirals. This emblem, found carved in stone at Neolithic sites, later held sacred by Celts, like Newgrange in Ireland, has become a core symbol of Celtic reconstructionists. It is interpreted in many ways as the three realms, land, sea, sky, which together make up the Celtic cosmos, or the tripartite division of being. So, for instance, physical, mental, spiritual, or the triple goddess aspects, maiden, mother, crone. Another common symbol is the triquetra, a three-cornered knot, often used in Celtic Christian manuscripts, but likely rooted in earlier triadic symbolism. Knotwork in general, those intricate, endless knots in Celtic art, convey the interconnectedness of life and the eternal cycle of nature, concepts very much in line with Druidic poetry or philosophy. Natural elements and celestial bodies were also key symbols. The sun was revered. Some Celtic depictions show a solar wheel or a cross in circle motif, which later morphed into the Celtic cross. The moon phases were important for timing rituals. So, for instance, mistletoe was cut at a waxing moon, and modern Celtic witches often honor lunar cycles with esbats. Oak trees themselves were symbols of endurance and sacred knowledge. Many place names like Derry in Ireland, from Dore, meaning oak, grove, point to ancient sacred oaks. As Pliny wrote, the Druids held nothing more sacred than the mistletoe and the oak. The mistletoe that grew high in oaks, especially when bearing its white berries around midwinter, was a powerful symbol of life in the dead of winter. Hence its use in fertility and healing rituals. To the Celts, mistletoe represented divine life force. Some interpret it as the oak's soul, and it had to be handled with great ritual care. The Celtic cosmology can be gleaned from myth. They spoke of the other world existing alongside our world, sometimes underground or across the Western Sea, rather than a single high heaven or underworld. The Celtic otherworld was a parallel realm reachable through mounds, caves, lakes, or mist. The Irish concept of Tir Nanog, land of youth, exemplifies this, a paradise across the ocean or under the hills where heroes might voyage and time stand still. The Welsh called a similar realm Anwen. These realms were not afterlife heavens for all, but more often domains of the gods and fairy folk, occasionally visited by humans. The Celts did not leave a clear creation myth or world-ending myth, but there are hints. For instance, a saying in multiple sources that the world would end if the sky fell, a fear captured in the humorous anecdote of gulls fearing the sky may fall on our heads. What is clear is the sacral view of the natural world. Features like rivers, springs, and hills were imbued with spirit. A river could be a goddess, such as Boann of the Boyne or Sequana of the Seine. A hill could house a deity or be an ancestral grave. A notable symbol bridging myth and ritual is the wheel, often associated with the sun or with Tyrannus, the thunder god. Archaeologists have found many small wheel votives in Celtic sanctuaries. Modern Celtic pagans have adopted the wheel of the year, an 8-spoked cycle of festivals, which is partly drawn from Celtic fire festivals and partly from solstices, equinoxes, or other traditions. This wheel symbolizes the annual solar journey and agrarian cycle, a key part of Celtic and Wiccan calendars alike. The Celtic year was marked by seasonal festivals that continue to be celebrated in neo-pagan practice, often under their Gaelic names. In the insular Celtic calendar, the year was essentially split in two halves, light and dark, summer and winter, demarcated by the great fire festivals of Beltane and Samhain. Each half was further bisected by two more festivals, yielding 4 major holy days that corresponded to the pastoral and agricultural cycle. Samhain is November 1st. The Celtic day began on Eve, so celebrations started on October 31st. Samhain marked the end of summer and the harvest, inaugurating the dark half of the year. In early Irish society, Samhain was the New Year's feast, at a time when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Spirits of the dead and other worldly beings could visit the mortal realm. It was a time for final harvest, culling herds, and tribal gatherings. Many bonfires lit the hilltops, and later folklore held that fairies and souls roamed freely on Samhain night. Our modern Halloween derives from this festival. Interestingly, the word Samhain originally meant summer's end. Old Irish Samhain, or it's either Samhain or Samain, from Sam, summer, underscoring its traditional nature or transitional nature. Imbolc was February 1st. Imbolc heralded the first stirrings of spring, roughly at lambing season. The term likely comes from Old Irish meaning in the belly of the ewe, or alternatively is linked to milk. It's also called oa milk, sheep's milk. It was a time of purification and rebirth. Fields were prepared for planting, and the Celtic goddess Brigid, later Saint Brigid, was especially honored. Indeed, Imbolc was sacred to Brigid as a patroness of hearth and lamb, fire and fertility. In modern Celtic witchcraft, Imbolc rituals often involve lighting candles or hearth fires to welcome the sun's growing strength and hanging Brigid's crosses or corn dollies as symbols of protection and growth. Beltane was on May 1st. This is the great spring festival of fire and fertility, opening the bright half year as the weather warms and livestock went to summer pastures. The name Beltane likely means fires of Bel, or Belenos, being a shining deity or the word for bright. Traditional accounts describe druids lighting bonfires on Beltane Eve and driving cattle between two purifying fires to protect them from disease before the summer grazing. People would likely pass through the smoke or leap the flames. Beltane was a time of merriment, matchmaking, and rituals to ensure fertility of crops and herds. Modern pagans celebrate it with maypole dances, a later medieval addition symbolizing the union of female-male principles, and by recreating the need fire tradition. The festival is also called Set Shawan in some old sources, meaning first of summer. Lugnasad or Lugnasa occurred on August 1st. This harvest festival honors the first fruits and the god Lug. As the name suggests, it was originally instituted by Lug in myth to commemorate the foster mother, Tailtiu, who died after clearing the plains of Ireland for agriculture. Lugnasad was marked by great fairs and assemblies, the most famous being the Tailtean Games, akin to an athletic and trading fair in ancient Ireland. It was a time of community gathering, feasting on the new grain, and competitive games. Religious offerings of the first harvest, grains, berries, would be made, and there would be customs like hand fasting, trial marriages at the time. That's so weird. Modern Celtic witches and Reconstructionists celebrate Lugnasad as a grateful acknowledgement of abundance, baking breads, honoring Lug, or the goddess of the land, and recognizing the impending decline of summer. Just see how I'm doing here. All right, we'll make a good time. These four festivals correspond to cross-quarter days, midway between solstice and equinox, and they survived Christianization and folk customs. So, as an example, Samhain became All Saints, All Hallows. Imbolc became St. Brigid's Day, Candlemas. Beltane had May Day, maypoles, and Lugnasa was observed in harvest fairs. In addition, the solstices and equinoxes themselves are now often included in the ritual calendar, making the modern neo-pagan Wheel of the Year, though the extent to which ancient Celts marked them is debated. The winter solstice around December 21st did have significance. The Neolithic monuments aligned to it, like Newgrange's solstice illumination, were later woven into Celtic lore. For instance, Irish legend holds that the Dagda mated with the Morrigan at Newgrange on winter solstice, symbolically ensuring the return of light and life. Summer solstice was likewise a time of bonfire on hilltops and later folklore, like St. John's Eve fires. Each festival carried its symbolism and rites. At Samhain, carved turnip lanterns and embers of the communal bonfire. At Imbolc, Bridget's woven crosses and snowdrops. At Beltane, green bows and May blossoms decorating doors. At Lugnasad, the first sheaf of wheat or bilberries gathered on hilltops. These symbols find their way into modern practice. So, for instance, a Celtic witch at Imbolc might place candles in every window and a bowl of milk on the altar for Brigid, or a druid at Lugnasad might bake a figure of the Corn King in bread and symbolically sacrifice it by eating it as a blessing. In sum, the Celtic festivals form a ritual spine of the year, celebrating the turning of seasons and the mythic dramas of the gods. A modern practitioner of Celtic witchcraft will likely honor these days with ceremonies that combine old folklore, fire rites, feasting, dances with new pagan spirituality. The continuity of names like Samhain and Beltane in today's vernacular and even pop culture is a testament to how influential the Celtic seasonal framework has been on Western pagan practice at large. All right, now moving on, magical practices, tools, and rituals, traditional Celtic magic and divination. Celtic witchcraft draws heavily on what is known or can be inferred of magical practices among ancient Celts. While the historical record is fragmentary, several key areas emerge: divination, healing, and the use of spoken charms. The Druids and Philid were said to practice advanced divination, reading auguries and natural phenomenon, and through ritual sacrifice. Roman accounts describe a practice of extispicy, examining entrails, and observing the death convulsions of sacrificial victims to predict the future. The Celts also practiced ornithomancy. It's divining by birds. Irish sources mention the wise one looking at bird flights and auspices. In fact, the Latin term augur means bird diviner, might parallel function of the Celtic vates. The Obod tradition notes that ancient Druids used not only skies and animals, but all four elements for omens. Cloud shapes could represent the air, fire scrying, water gazing, and casting lots with stones or sticks on the earth. One documented form in Ireland was the tarbfice, or bull dream. A seer would sleep in a bull's hide and receive visions, a form of shamanic incubation. Another was imbus ferosnai, a technique where a poet chewed raw flesh or slept with hands over his face to receive prophetic verses. These indicate a rich tradition of Celtic seership that modern Celtic witches seek to emulate through trance work and nature-based scrying. Healing and herbcraft were other domains of Celtic magic, closely tied to Druidic practice. Druid healers used herbs like mistletoe, rowan, yarrow, and others for medicine and magic. As mentioned, mistletoe harvested ritually was considered a panacea for poison and infertility. Folk remedies from later Celtic regions include the use of 9 sacred herbs, or charms spoken over water and herbs to bless them. A surviving Scottish Gaelic charm, recorded by folklorist Alexander Carmichael, invokes the blessings of the 9. That's pretty creepy. Possibly the 9 aspects of Bridget, or 9 healing fairy sisters, over an ill person. Such charms often combined Christian and older Celtic elements, but at their core was the belief in word magic, that a spoken spell, whether a poem, prayer, or satire, carried the force of intent and enchantment. Bards could curse with satire, so the famous tale of the poet who rhymed a rat to death in medieval Ireland, or bless with praise. The concept of glamour, from Gaelic glam dyson, a poet's curse, originates here, meaning a magical illusion or enchantment through words. Modern Celtic witches often incorporate written or spoken Ogham sigils in their spells for this reason, honoring the poetic magic of the Druids. One unique aspect of Celtic magic is the use of the Gaesa, singular Geis, as touched upon earlier. These were binding magical conditions that could act like protective vows or fateful taboos. For instance, an Irish warrior might have a Geis that he must never eat dog meat or never refuse a meal when offered, creating situations of potential moral testing in stories. In a magical sense, placing a Geis on someone was a serious act. It compelled them to a certain behavior under pain of supernatural retribution. Celtic witches today might refer to Geis when taking on a personal vow or crafting a long-term spell. Essentially, they set a magical intention that binds them to a course for self-discipline or spiritual growth. Curses, the flip side of blessings in Celtic lore, often took the form of a Geis that brings misfortune if violated. The famous curse of Macha in Ulster, causing men to suffer labor pains in the Tain story, is an example of a powerful female figure using a spoken curse to avenge herself. Modern practitioners tend to be careful with curse work, but they study these legends for insight into ethical magic and the consequences of spoken intent. Divination tools that are popular in Celtic witchcraft today often draw from historical roots. One prominent example is the Ogham alphabet. Ogham is an early medieval Irish writing system of 20 Ogham letters, each named after a tree or plant in one interpretation. There's medieval legend, Takmark Etain, describing a druid using 4 U wands inscribed with Ogham letters to discover information. While historically Ogham was mainly used for inscriptions on standing stones, modern druids and Celtic witches have adopted Ogham staves or carves as a divination method. Typically, one might cast or draw a few Ogham symbols and interpret the meaning based on the trees. For example, birch for new beginnings, oak for strength, and doorway, yew for endings and ancestral wisdom, etc. As Obad notes, even if we cannot be certain ancient druids actually did this, it has become an integral part of modern ovate seer training in druid orders. Similarly, some use runes, though those are Germanic. Celtic-focused practitioners often prefer Ogham for cultural specificity. Magical tools and sacred crafts. Celtic witchcraft employs many of the standard witches' tools, often with Celtic symbolism layered in. The cauldron, for instance, is a universal witch's tool for brewing and transformation, but in a Celtic context, it resonates deeply with the cauldron of Ciridwen, which is the source of information, or Dagda's cauldron, which is a source of sustenance. Many Celtic witches keep a cauldron on their altar as a symbol of the goddess of rebirth and of abundance. In ritual, it might be filled with water for scrying, peering into the other world, or used to burn offerings and petitions. The wand or staff is another example, typically made of a sacred Celtic tree, wood. Yew for connection to ancestors, oak for strength, hazel for knowledge, rowan for protection, etc. It continues the Druid's legacy as a tool directing will and energy. A modern Druid might cut their own wand from a tree with appropriate prayers, echoing the old practice of gathering mistletoe with ceremony to ensure the tree's spiritual contents to the use. Crystals and stones figure in modern practice too, though this is more a New Age tradition than historically Celtic. However, certain stones had importance historically. For instance, the stone of Fall, Laia Fail at Tara, which roared under the true High King, is a legendary talisman. Many stone circles and standing stones across Celtic lands are believed to harbor spirits or act as energy centers. Thus, working with hinges, dolmens, and stone circles is popular. Some Celtic pagans hold rituals at Stonehenge, Castlereagh, or other megalithic sites, honoring them as ancient sacred spaces. Even though these megaliths predate the Celts, they've been incorporated into Celtic lore. A Celtic witch might also have a set of stones etched with symbols, runes, or ogham for casting lots, harkening back to simple earth divination. We should note the importance of music and incantation as tools in Celtic magic. The bard's harp music was said to enchant listeners. The Dagda's harp could make those who heard it laugh, cry, or sleep on command. So singing or playing Celtic songs could be a form of spellcasting or raising power in ritual. Even a non-musical practitioner might use the rhythmic bodhran frame drum or rattle made of shells, acorns to induce trance, mimicking the shamanic aspects of druidic practice. Totemic and protective items often seen in Celtic witchcraft include the St. Brigid's cross, a woven rush cross that likely began as a pagan sun wheel or symbol of the goddess, hung in homes for protection on Imbolc, and the Celtic knot jewelry or Triskelion amulets worn for spiritual focus. The Celtic cross itself, a cross with a ring, although Christian in origin, has been reinterpreted by some neo-druids as representing the four directions and the eternal circle of life. So you may find it used in rituals, sans overt Christian context. Modern interpretations also reimagine mythic artifacts. Some witches craft their own version of Lug's spear, perhaps as a ritual lance for directing energy, or a sword of Nuada. The athame or ritual blade in Wicca can be seen as analogous to Nuada's sword of light. The idea is that by naming these tools after Celtic treasures, the practitioner taps into the archetypal power those items represent. For example, using the sphere of Lug in ritual might symbolize aiming for victory or truth in the spell, while invoking the cauldron of Brigid might bless a healing brew. Rites and runes in today's Celtic witchcraft. Ritual structure in modern Celtic-oriented witchcraft can vary depending on whether it's more Wiccan or more Reconstructionist. A Wicca-influenced ceremony might cast a circle calling on the guardians of the watchtowers, but swap in Celtic imagery for the elements. For instance, calling east as the realm of Gwynedd, with a mighty wind god, south as the realm of fiery Nuadu, or dragon of the south. Goddess and god could be invoked by Celtic names, perhaps Danu as Earth Mother and Sharunas as horned god in a general way. In contrast, a Reconstructionist ritual might dispense with circle casting and instead formally call the Sidhe, spirits or fae, and gods to attend, using Gaelic language prayers. They might light a central fire and offer mead or milk in the fire for Brigid, pour out water to the earth for Tilidiu, and tell a portion of a myth appropriate to the occasion, storytelling itself being a sacred act. One interesting development is the use of Celtic rune or symbol sets in magic. While the Norse runes are well known, Celtic practitioners have looked to ogham and also ancient Celtic symbols like the spiral, the awen, the Celtic knot as sigils. The awen symbol is like a circle with a dot in it with three rays down, is actually a neo-druid emblem coined by an 18th century revivalists to mean divine inspiration or flowing spirit. Many Celtic witches and druids will draw the awen in the air or on paper to invoke inspiration from the divine. It represents the three bars of light, of poetic inspiration pouring into the world. Likewise, the spiritual labyrinth motif might be used in path-working meditations. One imagines walking a spiritual path, like the one carved at Newgrange, into the other world and then back out as a guided journey. Fairy faith practices also distinguish Celtic witchcraft from some other paths. The Celtic cultures, especially Irish and Scottish, retained a robust belief in the fair folk, Shay, Tuatha De Danann as fairies, Tylwyth Teg in Welsh, etc. Even today, some practitioners leave offerings for the fairies at fairy forts, wells, or under hawthorn trees. A Celtic witch often cultivates a respectful relationship with these otherworldly inhabitants. For instance, offering butter, milk, or shiny coins at Samhain or Beltane to ensure peace with the good neighbors. They may seek guidance or assistance from fairy allies in magic with caution, as folklore abounds with warnings about the capriciousness of the she. This focus on fairy lore sets Celtic witchcraft apart from, say, a Norse heathen who deals more with landvater, or a ceremonial magician who might not invoke nature spirits at all. Still, parallels exist. Norse elves versus Celtic elves, highlighting an overlap in pagan animism. In summary, the magical practices of Celtic witchcraft today are a blend of old and new. Ancient divination methods revived, Ogham staves, fire gazing, traditional lore, it includes Gaesa, herbal charms, fairy faith, and those are put into contemporary use, and modern magical techniques given Celtic form. So casting circles with Celtic deities, crafting tools named after Celtic treasures. The goal for many is to live in harmony with the Celtic seasonal and spiritual cycle, using magic as the Druids did, to heal, to seek wisdom, and to honor the sacredness in all things. As one source eloquently put it, modern Druids and Celtic witches seek the hidden causes behind appearances through divination and connection with nature, keeping alive the intuitive mystical side of the Celtic heritage in a world far removed from Iron Age Europe. All right, now we talk through some regional variations between Irish, Welsh, and Scottish traditions. The label Celtic actually encompasses a family of cultures and mythologies. The three most prominent in terms of surviving lore are Irish, which is the Gaelic branch, Welsh, which is the Brittonic branch, and then Scottish, which is the Gaelic branch with Pictish influence. While sharing common roots, each developed unique traits and tales. A nuanced exploration of Celtic witchcraft must recognize these regional distinctions, as modern practitioners often focus on one Celtic cultural strand or another. Just give me a moment. Okay. A little bit over halfway through. I'm running a little bit fast. So, we're going to make it. We're definitely going to make it. So, Irish traditions and magic. Ireland preserves the largest body of Celtic mythology and folklore, thanks to medieval monks who recorded tales of the Tuatha De Danann, Ulster warriors, and Fianna. Irish mythology is divided into cycles: mythological, Ulster, Fenian, historical, and is rich with druidic and magical themes. The Irish believe their gods became the Shay, or fairies, when Ireland was Christianized. The Tuatha De Danann were said to have retreated into the Hollow Hills, where they live on as the good people. Thus, Irish folklore about the Shay, or the She, is essentially a continuation of pagan belief. These beings are powerful, sometimes tutelary, and must be respected or risked at one's peril. An Irish-focused witch or druid will pay particular attention to the she fairies, leaving offerings at fairy mounds, many of which are ancient barrows, and observing taboos about them, never calling them by the name fairy, but rather good neighbors, or wee folk, for example. Ghosts and ancestral spirits also figure strongly. The festival of Samhain originated in Ireland as the time the dead could visit. Irish magic often centers on poetry and prophecy. The word Fili, poet seer, indicates how entwined poetic inspiration Imbos was with magical insight. Many Irish myths highlight riddles, shape-shifting, and powerful curses blessings. For instance, the hero Finn McCool gained wisdom by accidentally tasting the salmon of knowledge, which is a mythical fish. The goddess Fuamach used druidic spells to turn her rival into a pool of water and later into a butterfly. The curse of Macha caused Ulsterman's labor pains. These stories feed the practices of Irish-inspired witches who might incorporate shape-shifting in astral work, which means taking on an animal form in meditation, inspired by tales of druids becoming stags or birds, or use symbolic actions from myth, like ritually cooking an herbal blend as the salmon of knowledge to gain insight. Irish tradition also places great stock in sacred landscape. Locations like the Hill of Tara, Uisneach, the mythic center of Ireland, or Agam inscribed pillar stones, are often seen as nodes of power. Holy wells dedicated to Brigid or other saints, likely once pagan wells, are still visited for healing and wishes. Tying Clutie strips on the tree beside the well is a living folk magic practice. An Irish pagan might continue this, treating the well's spirit with reverence and integrating it into their spell work, for example, using well water in rituals for healing. Finally, Ireland's polytheism in modern revival is very vibrant. Groups like Tuatha Imbolg or EBC, which is Eelhouse, are specifically Irish Reconstructionist, worshipping the Dagda, Brigid, Lug, the Morrigan, etc. These practitioners revive offerings and rites from Irish texts. So, for instance, reciting portions of the Libor Gabala Iran, which is the Book of Invasions, as a mythic context in ceremony, or performing the Saining, blessing of a newborn with water and fire in the name of Brigid, as was done in folk custom. Irish magic often carries an aura of heroic quest and bard-like mystique, reflecting how well preserved and central the myths are. It's also noteworthy that many popular Celtic deities in neo-paganism, Brigid, Lugd, the Morrigan, Manannán Mac Lir, are all specifically Irish, showing Ireland's outsized influence on Celtic spirituality globally. All right, moving on to Welsh traditions and lore. Wales has the second largest corpus of Celtic myth, primarily in the Mabinogian, a collection of medieval Welsh tales. Welsh mythology has its own flavor, deeply tied to Arthurian legend and native heroes like Pwyll, Bran, or Taliesin. A key figure of Welsh lore is the concept of Annwn, the otherworld, often portrayed as an underground kingdom or enchanted island ruled by Aran or Gwyn ap Nudd, the latter leading the wild hunt. Welsh magical tradition emphasizes illusion and transformation. The wizard Gwydion is a master of enchantment, creating illusions in war and transforming flowers into a woman. The Blodeuwedd, the goddess Ceridwen, brews a cauldron of inspiration that inadvertently transforms the boy Gwion into the bard Taliesin after a chase where both shapeshift through various animal forms. This story in particular of brewing the Awen in Ceridwen's cauldron is foundational for modern druidry in Wales. Many Welsh-oriented practitioners view themselves as seekers of Awen, divine inspiration, symbolized by Ceridwen's potion. They may reenact this metaphorically by long meditations or creative pursuits to brew inspiration or hold Eisteddfod style gatherings, which are bardic circles to share poetry and music, as in traditional Welsh bardic festivals. The children of Don and Lear in Welsh myth correspond to sky light deities and sea dark deities, respectively, showing a duality. For instance, from the Don family, we have Gwydion, a magician, his nephew Lulaw Gifts, analogous to Lug, a youthful hero who undergoes a cycle of death and rebirth via a magical eagle transformation. In Arianrod, a complicated goddess of the silver wheel associated with stars and fate. For Lear's side come Bran the Blessed, a giant king whose severed head later offers oracles. Bronwyn, whose name means white raven, and Manawydan, cognate of Manannan, connected to the sea. These figures are less widely worshipped today than the Irish ones, but Welsh-oriented pagans do honor them. Bran is intriguing for witchcraft because his severed head was said to protect Britain from invaders as long as it remained buried facing France, a kind of enduring talisman. Some modern witches have likened Bran's head to the concept of a apotropaic charm protecting the land. Indeed, the Celtic cult of the head, the belief that the head was the seat of the soul and a protective power, is often exemplified in Welsh stories and Celtic art of heads. A Celtic witch might incorporate this by, say, keeping a carved skull or stone head on the altar to represent ancestral wisdom and warding. Welsh magic and folk practice also survived in the form of Curzyd, cycle of bards, and cunning folk traditions. Notably, Wales had figures like Gwenllian the Witch of Welsh lore, and a rich tapestry of plant lore in the medieval Welsh herbal grimoire called the Book of Taliesin, which includes poems with esoteric herbal references. Modern Welsh witches often celebrate their heritage by using the Welsh language and ritual, addressing Aradia or Ceridwen in Welsh, for example, and by observing local customs like Colin Mai, which is May Day, and Colin Grafe, All Hallows, with Welsh nuances, lighting Colcluth, which are bonfires, and Nas Galan Gafe, and marking stones for each family member, a divination where any stone missing from the ashes in the morning portended that person's death within the year. Yikes. Wales also gives us Arthurian magic. Many Celtic witches, even outside Wales, draw upon the Merlin and Arthur myths, the sword and the stone, the Holy Grail, the Enchantress Morgana, or Morgan Le Fay. These may not be ancient Celtic per se, they're medieval and syncretic, but they are part of the Brythonic mythos that evolved in Wales and Cornwall. For those inclined incorporating Grail lore or Merlin's prophecies, Merlin is sometimes likened to a late survival of druidic figure. For instance, the wild prophetic madmen in the woods, Myrddin Willet, can be an element of Celtic craft. A Welsh Wicca coven might cast the circle calling the dragons of Cymru, or invoking Merlin and Rhiannon as god and goddess figures, which shows the blend of mythic inspirations. Moving on to Celtic and other regions. Scotland presents an interesting blend. The Scottish Highlands were Gaelic-speaking and shared much with Irish Gaelic tradition, and many Scottish clan legends trace lineages back to Irish heroes or to the Tuatha De Danann. At the same time, Scotland had the legacy of the Picts, an earlier Celtic people about whom not much is written, but who left symbol stones and hints of a distinctive spirituality. Some Pictish symbols, like the Pictish beast or the crescent and V-rod, remain mysterious. Modern Scottish witches often gravitate toward Highland Gaelic lore or the colorful lowland witch folklore of the 16th to 18th centuries. Scotland notoriously had many witch trials, but also tales of witches who were basically folk healers. For example, the story of the witch of Laggan, or Isabel Gowdy, a famous confessed witch, with her vivid descriptions of fairy meetings and shapeshifting. I shall go into a hare with sorrow and such and mickle care. Gowdy's chants have actually inspired contemporary witches to reclaim them as functional shapeshifting spells. A standout figure in Scottish lore is Cailleach, the Hag of Winter, known as Beara or Byra in some parts. The Cailleach is an ancient goddess who personifies the harsh winds and mountains. She is one-eyed, blue-skinned, and said to carry a hammer or staff that freezes the ground. Scottish tales say she rules the winter months and turns into a standing stone come spring, or is defeated by the young maiden, often Brigid, at Imbolc. Modern witches in Scotland might honor the Cailleach in winter rituals, leaving an offering on a high hill to appease her and asking for a gentle winter. The Cailleach's ability to create mountains and lakes by dropping rocks from her apron or striding across the land speaks to a mythology of landscape creation that's distinctly Scottish. Which is attuned to land spirits there will know local landmarks associated with her. Scotland is also rich in second sight traditions. The Highland Tabshir, or Seer, who can see fairies or foresee deaths. The Fife, or call over the eye, was said to give this sight. The concept of fae runs deep. Many Scottish families have a banshee equivalent, which is the washing woman at the ford whose appearance portends death. A Scottish-based practice might thus strongly involve ancestor veneration and communication with spirits. For instance, on Samhain, a Scottish witch may follow the old custom of the dumb supper, laying out food for the unseen guests, ancestral spirits, and observing omens in the environment. Beyond the big three of Ireland, Wales, Scotland, there are other Celtic regions with their own nuances. Brittany in France has fairy tales and saint lore that blend Catholic or Celtic gods. So, for instance, a Cornish or Breton witch might invoke Ceridwen or Belisama, who lingered in local folklore as fairies or saints. Cornwall and Ireland and the Isle of Man also have rich folklore. So, for instance, Cornish pixies, which are mischievous fairy imps, and Manx water spirits like the Finadri. These local flavors matter. A Celtic witch in Cornwall might incorporate Arthurian legends and local sea gods, like Merlin's association with Tintagel and the sea, whereas one on the Isle of Man might honor Manannán mac Lir explicitly, since Manannán is the legendary patron of man. In essence, while all Celtic cultures share themes like otherworld journeys, shape-shifting druids, sacred wells, and seasonal fires, each region's names, languages, and stories differ. Modern practitioners often choose a cultural focus. So, for instance, identifying as an Irish polytheist or a Welsh druid, or following the Scottish fairy faith. They will use the deities and tongues of that culture and ritual, preserving authenticity. Where they overlap is in general reverence for nature and a worldview that sees spirit in every river, standing stone, and animal, a legacy of the old Celtic animism. To give a quick comparative example, an Irish-based ritual for Imbolc might involve Brigid of the Hearth daughter of the Dagda, and might include Gaelic prayers, a Welsh-based Imbolc, sometimes called Gwyl Fair, St. Mary's Feast, or a secular Candlemas adoption might instead make offerings to Olwen or simply celebrate the returning light without the Brigid focus. A Scottish Imbolc might involve driving the Cailleach away and bringing in a Bridie or Bridget with a bed made for her. All celebrate Imbolc with unique mythic accents. Now, when you compare this with other witchcraft traditions, Celtic witchcraft as a modern construct shares much in common with broader pagan witchcraft. Yet it maintains distinct cultural flavors that set it apart from, say, Norse or non-Celtic traditions. Comparing it to British traditional witchcraft, Norse paganism, and Wicca highlights both overlaps and unique elements. All right, let's start with versus British traditional witchcraft. We'll call it BTW, or Bravo Tango Whiskey. The term British traditional witchcraft often refers to the initiatory coven traditions that originated in Britain, notably Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca. These BTW systems provide a structured, degree-based practice with specific rituals: cast circle, invoke 4 elements, drawing down the moon, etc. Celtic witchcraft can sometimes fall under BTW if one's lineage is Gardnerian but focused on Celtic deities. However, typically Celtic witchcraft is less formalized. It does not necessarily require initiation by a coven high priestess or adherence to the strict Book of Shadows liturgy. Instead, many Celtic witches are eclectic solitaries or members of druid groves, which operate differently from BTW covens. Where BTW and Celtic paths overlap is in foundational technique, circle casting, the concept of a god and goddess, though BTW often conceive of them in more abstract duotheistic terms, whereas a Celtic practitioner might be truly polytheistic. In fact, Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca themselves draw inspiration from Celtic mythology. Gerald Gardner included chants in Gaelic, and Wicca's Wheel of the Year adopted 4 Celtic festivals. So one could say Wicca owes a debt to Celtic lore. But BTW is, by design, an occultist synthesis, with elements from ceremonial magic, folklore, etc., not culturally specific. Celtic witchcraft, on the other hand, places heavy emphasis on Celtic cultural context, using Celtic mythos, sometimes leaning Gaelic or Welsh phrases, and engaging with Celtic history. Additionally, BTW covens work with a set hierarchy and secrecy, whereas Celtic pagan groups, like many Druid orders or Celtic Wiccan circles, tend to be more open, often sharing rituals at public gatherings. So, for instance, open Druid ceremonies at ancient sites. In short, British traditional witchcraft provides the template of modern witchcraft practice, and Celtic witchcraft infuses that template with Celtic content and ethos. A Gardnerian might invoke the Lord and Lady in general, where a Celtic witch invokes specific gods like Lug and Brigid. A BTW witch may cast a circle calling generic elemental guardians, whereas a Celtic one calls the land spirits of Erie or of Ire, or the 4 treasures of the Tuatha De Danann at the quarters. A BTW ritual might be framed by the classic charge of the goddess, whereas a Celtic ritual might incorporate a recital from the Carmina Gadalica, or poem by Taliesin. Now, versus Wicca, which is eclectic neo-pagan witchcraft, there's the following differences. Wicca, in general, is the modern religion of witchcraft, founded by Gardner and others, and it has since spread and diversified. Many self-identified witches today are neo-pagan eclectic practitioners who might mix pantheons and are not formally part of British traditional covens. Celtic witchcraft in many cases is a subset of this broader Wicca pagan category. Indeed, Celtic Wicca is essentially an eclectic Wicca with Celtic flavor. However, a key difference lies in theology and authenticity. Classical Wicca is duotheistic, revering a moon goddess and a horn god, with all other gods seen as faces of those two, and oriented around a Western occult framework with tools like the Athame, associations from the Golden Dawn, etc. Strict Wiccan might view Ceridwen, Morrigan simply as names for the great goddess, and Lug, Cernunnos, Herne as aspects of the great god, effectively subsuming Celtic deities into a dual deity system. In contrast, a Celtic Reconstructionist or even a culturally focused Wiccan tends to be polytheistic in a culturally consistent way, treating Brigid, the Morrigan, Lug, Manannan, etc. as distinct real entities, not just faces. Furthermore, Celtic witchcraft often places a stronger emphasis on ancestral worship and land spirits relative to Wicca. Wicca certainly acknowledges elements and nature spirits, but Celtic practice gives them names and identities from Celtic lore. The ancestor in the barrow, the guardian fairy of the spring, ritual structure may also differ. A non-Wiccan Celtic ceremony might not use the ceremony magic-derived circle casting with archangels or watchtowers, choosing something like calling the three realms, land, sea, sky, and the fire in the center, a format some Druid groups use, which is more aligned with Celtic cosmology than the Hermetic quarters. That said, the overlap with Wicca is large. Many Celtic witches do consider themselves Wiccan or witches in the Wiccan tradition, and they celebrate the 8 Sabbats, identical to other Wiccans, just often using Celtic names and customs. For instance, a Beltane maypole dance in Greenbows, a Samhain dumb supper, and Shay invocation. Wicca's influence ensured that Celtic seasonal festivals remain core to modern witchcraft. Moreover, magical techniques like casting circles, raising power, invoking a goddess into a priestess, drawing down, these are shared. The difference is largely aesthetic and theological. Wicca is broad and syncretic. Celtic witchcraft is narrow and culture specific. One could compare it to language. Wicca is a lingua franca of modern witchcraft, while Celtic Path is one dialect of it with unique vocabulary and stories. Versus Norse paganism, which is heathenry. Norse paganism, asatru, heathenry, and Celtic paganism are often compared because they are both reconstructed polytheisms of Europe. Culturally, they stem from different branches of Indo-European, but they do have analogous roles. So thunder gods, war gods, mother goddesses, etc. A key difference is the amount of written lore. Norse tradition benefits from the poetic Edda, prose Edda, and sagas detailing their cosmology. Yggdrasil, the world tree with 9 worlds, the creation myth of fire and ice, Ragnarok, the end of the world, etc. Celtic tradition lacks an equivalent coherent myth text. It's more fragmentary and localized. Therefore, Norse pagan practice often has a more standardized set of myths to draw on, the Eddic narratives of Odin, Thor, Freya, etc. Whereas Celtic practice is a bit more mysterious interpretive, drawing on scattered myths of different regions. For example, a Norse blot ritual might retell Thor's fishing for Jormungandr, or Odin's hanging on the tree as part of its liturgy. A Celtic rite might tell a portion of the Second Battle of Mag Tuired or the story of Rhiannon, but there isn't a single unifying saga everyone knows to the same extent as, say, the story of Odin and the ruins. All right, just take a breather there and just check the time. All right, we're making good time. Cosmologically, Norse paganism centers on Yggdrasil, the great ash tree connecting the realms. and a very developed map of the cosmos, Asgard, Midgard, Hell, etc. Celtic cosmology is mentioned as more triadic, sky, earth, sea, and otherworld focused rather than cosmic world tree focused. The Celts did reverse trees, oaks, yews, but there isn't an explicit world tree concept surviving, aside from perhaps hints and myths like the Bile, sacred tree of kinship or of Ireland. Interestingly, both Norse and Celtic myth did share the motif of the sacred tree and sacred wells. In Norse myth, the well of Urd at the base of Yggdrasil mirrors the Celtic sacred wells of wisdom, like Conla's well in Irish myth, where the salmon of knowledge swam. In practice, a Norse heathen blot might revolve around mead offerings and drinking horns, hailing gods in a symbol, which is a ritual toast format. A Celtic ceremony might revolve around a cauldron offering or pouring out mead into the earth and communal feasting, akin to the Irish Feast of Tara. Both traditions do offer food and drink to gods and spirits, albeit to different pantheons. One area of overlap, North and Celtic traditions both highly regard ancient or ancestor veneration and land spirits. Norse pagans have their landfater and house wights, like Tamti or Nisse, and Celtic folk belief has the fairies and spirits of place. A practitioner of either will likely make home offerings, a bit of milk for the brownies in Scotland or a bit of ale for the barn elf in Scandinavia. They also share Indo-European roots, so some deities have conceptual cousins, the Norse Thor, thunder god, and Celtic Tyrannus, both derive from the Proto-Indo-European thunder deity motif, and indeed the names are related: Thor, Thunar, Tyrannus, Perun in Slavic. Both Thor and Celtic thunder gods were linked to the oak tree. The Celts worshipped their Jupiter through oaks, and Thor had sacred oaks like Donar's oak. Similarly, the Mother Earth figures, the Norse Nerthus or Jord compared to Celtic Danu or Anu as Earth Mothers. Recognizing this, some modern pagans are eclectic across Celtic and Norse lines, but generally, heathenry tends to be more reconstructionist and culturally contained. Heathens often discourage mixing pantheons, and they follow a different ethos. Heathenry has a strong honor-based frith, peace and community, and tends toward a more tribal ancestral orientation with concepts like Thu, custom, and weird, fate. Celtic witchcraft, especially in Wiccan forms, can be more individualistic and mystical, emphasis on personal vision, the inner grove, shamanic journeying to the other world, etc. Whereas heathen rituals can feel a bit more formal and communitarian, symbols, focused traditions, etc. There is also the difference in magical systems. Norse magic includes runic divination and cider trance practices. Celtic magic, as we saw, includes Ogham divination and bardic trance. Some individuals practice both, but often they keep them separate, like different languages, to speak to the Norse gods versus the Celtic ones. Distinctive identity of Celtic witchcraft. What makes Celtic witchcraft distinct? A few key things emerge. The prominence of the Celtic pantheon and fairies, the use of Celtic cultural art, music, and language, and a particular earthly poetic spirit that comes from the Druidic legacy. Those drawn to Celtic witchcraft often cite a feeling of ancient connectivity when hearing Celtic music or visiting Celtic lands, a resonance with mossy forests, stone circles, misty hills that is very evocative. Its contrast is often described as wild and green, intertwined with forest and fae. In contrast, say, a ceremonial magician's magic might be described as celestial and geometric, and Norse magic is stormy and fate-bound. Celtic witchcraft emphasizes the heart and inspiration, Awen, as a source of power, aligning with the legendary bard Taliesin's words, "I am a wordsmith, I am a harp string, I am a spark from the fire." It blurs the line between bard, druid, and witch. Creativity itself is a magical act. To illustrate overlap, a Celtic witch and a Norse heathen might both hold a blot ritual under the full moon outdoors, share mead with their respective gods, and drum to enter trance to seek guidance. Both honor nature, but the Celtic witch might report meeting Brigid by a sacred well speaking in Gaelic in her vision, whereas the North heathen might encounter Odin by a cosmic tree speaking in Old Norse runes. Each tradition has its mythic vocabulary that colors the experience. In the greater community, there's a lot of camaraderie and cross-pollination. Many festivals or covens welcome both Celtic and Norse deities, etc. However, devotees will highlight uniqueness. Celtic witchcraft is distinct because it keeps alive Celtic heritage, the lore of druids, the haunting notes of the harp and pipes, the veneration of Lugnasad, and the remembrance of Samhain's solemnity. It also incorporates Celtic art, so spirals, knots as part of sacred space decoration, sometimes not seen in sky. It's not seen in, say, Greek Reconstructionist art altars or Kemetic Egyptian shrines. So in conclusion, Celtic witchcraft stands out by rooting magical practice in the Celtic cultural memory. Its myths, lands, and legendary spirits, while still sharing the common neo-pagan framework of reverence for nature, polytheism, and magical empowerment, whether in the solitary meditation of a druidess under an oak, or in the joyful circle dance around a Beltane bonfire. Celtic witchcraft today continues to weave the old enchantments of the Celts into the fabric of contemporary witchcraft, enriching the wider tapestry of modern pagan traditions. And that's all she wrote, folks. Whew! That was a lot. And it got me through most of the 2 hours. But there's still some time left. So I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about at this point. And I don't have an audience, at least. I mean, I do now when you're watching it. But as I'm recording it, I do not. So I have to kind of figure out how things are going. Well, I might as well just talk about the channel a little bit. It's been a brutal few weeks. Like I am working 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, because as you all know, I have 4 jobs, one of which is being sorely neglected, which is writing. I haven't written anything for a while, although I did sell a story randomly to a publication called Bullet Points. Bullet Time is a book written by Nick Mamatas. You should check that out. But it's a story that I sold to Bullet Points, and it was a reprint, so it had already been printed before. The name of the story is Mandible, and it's about a CIA operative who is either seeking or in possession of a cursed object, and he's making his way through war-torn Angola in the 1970s. Yes, very, very specific. You know, probably with the 3-2 battalion from South Africa, dealing with the Rui Org or the Rui Og or something like that. It's what they called, it's like the red eye. It means like red eye in Afrikaner or Dutch. I'm not sure. They're probably similar. But they were also called Stalin's organs, which are the Katyusha rockets that some of the people that they were fighting, would use. So anyway, it just goes into all that crazy, crazy stuff. So definitely check it out. I think it's going to be published on their website on October 31st, but there's also going to be, but that's the sanitized version. It took all my bad language out of it. But the grittier, more realistic version is they'll print that, and that's a good one. So I highly recommend that you check it out. The channel. This is super important. I should have said this at the beginning. If you think you are subscribed, please double check and make sure that YouTube didn't unsubscribe you. If they did unsubscribe you, please resubscribe. I would appreciate it. If you enjoyed this podcast and if you enjoy a lot of the interviews that I have, by the way, this is my second job. My first job is my day job. My third job is I do work at a local university, kind of off campus. But anyway, if you enjoy this podcast, please, please, please subscribe. Like my growth, like I'm still growing, but like in terms of subscribers, but my views are like they used to be kind of in the 50 to 60,000 range per month, and now they're in like the 30 to 40,000 range. So, please like, subscribe, share, just try to get this out to as many people as possible, because I'm like, I can't sustain this level of dedication and work forever without seeing green shoots and seeing the possibility that, it's going to go somewhere. And, for maybe this is too much information, but I gave myself 5 years to get to 100,000 subscribers. And, you're supposed to see an exponential. I saw a brief spike for one of Brandenburg's things, and then it just like this slow forever growth. So, but all it takes is one video to go viral and, go crazy. So, I'm in my fourth, this is kind of we're past the midpoint of my fourth year. So I basically have, let's see, I basically have 17 months to hit 100,000. I don't hit 100,000, I'm done. Like I can't. This is too much. It's way too much. So please subscribe, share with as many people as you can. And in terms of the channel, I have gotten videos scheduled out to mid-September. Like I'm just trying to get this stuff off my plate so I can focus on some other projects that have been getting the short shrift. So I'm trying to get about 2 months ahead. And then once I'm 2 months ahead, I'll probably take a month working on some other stuff. I still do my radio live streams and things like that, but that doesn't take near as much of the time as like editing episodes and, cleaning up audio and, just editing just in general. So I would say like per episode I put out, it's probably 8 hours of work. So, you're talking 32 hours a week because I've been doing 4 each week. So I'm always 1 week ahead, right? Because by the time, I'm in the week, 2 videos from my inventory are utilized or basically burned. So I immediately have to replace them with 2 of the 4 that I do. And then the next 2 just buy me an extra week. So you have to like methodically do that over and over again. This weekend, I hope to record enough videos for the rest of September, and then I'll be starting to work into October. I already have interview scheduled with Chris Leto, so I'm looking forward to that. It's like super early in the morning because California and Portugal do not have like a great overlap in terms of schedules. So anyway, that's kind of phase 1. Then I want to put together a bunch of short story anthologies that I've already written the short stories. They've already sold to publications. I have the rights. So I'm probably there's one that's pretty much done. I just have to do a Kindle version. And there's a few other things I need to ask about marketing, etc. and it's got a cover. Everything's all set. I have to create 2 more, and again, it's not hard to do. I have templates that I put together, and okay. One thing I want to say is fuck Uber. Fuck Uber. Okay? Like I get this little like thing. It just like completely interrupts, like takes over, like on my iPhone, it like takes over my headphones and then like just sends me some fucking spam. All right, okay, I'll be quiet now. But like I don't want that. It like takes over my headphones and I can't hear what I'm doing, and it's completely useless, nonsensical spam. So anyway, I'm sorry for the language over the radio, but like it's just not helpful, not at all helpful or appreciated. So anyway, so I want to get some of those anthologies done. I am looking at potentially starting 2 other channels just to see, because part of it, parcel in the back of my mind is that because this topic is a fringe topic, that YouTube or the powers that be actively suppress these things, unless you're unless you're a complete idiot or like a dean of the deep state and you just do their bidding. So there are some exceptions that break out of it, like the guy who does the night shift channel. I think he does generally good work and he grew fast and deservingly. I think Jesse Michaels, while he gets guests, in a somewhat sketchy way, like, but his production values are absolutely excellent. And, again, he deserves everything that he gets in terms of how well the channel's doing and things like that. I can't think of any others. Well, then there's Cosmic Road, but he's got the same problem I do, right? We're just churning stuff out. I mean, he churns stuff out every single day, and there are freaking idiots who also churn stuff out every day, but are doing much better than him, and it makes absolutely no sense, right? It's just, but I'm not going to mention the idiots, but I'm thinking of very specific people, to be honest with you. But I'm not going to do that. It's just not. It's petty, and it's just not right. But Jack Connor, definitely go and subscribe to him on Cosmic Road. Like he works his butt off every single day. He's putting something out. So, and he's got the same growth pains as I do. He's doing slightly better, but he puts something out every day. He should be slightly better. And we have slightly different formats, but definitely check him out. I'm trying to think what other crazy stuff I still have going on. So then I have 2 novels that got pretty close to professional publishing contracts, but they just didn't get it. And I'm tired of waiting. So I'm just going to package those and I'm going to release them too. But that'll be tied to some of this new YouTube channel stuff. So I might create 2 new YouTube channels, one in a completely unrelated genre to this. Another, I might just use like AI video to animate a lot of my short stories and then just post that maybe 1 short story a week. But I want to build up a full year of inventory of all that stuff, because if it ends up being a dud, I don't want to give up right away, right? I want to make sure that I just do enough work. And the only way to do that is just generate a lot of stuff in advance and then just set it and let it go and then just see what happens. But anyway, that's kind of where I am right now. I'm just working. Hopefully someday, I really hope that, why can't I remember her name? Lori, I hope Lori Lothian was right about, I mean, if you all, saw what she gave me, like a free Zodiac reading, and, nothing that good has happened in my life yet, but I hope she's right, because if she's right, then, all that hard work will not only pay off, but it'll be like a significant significantly successful. So I don't know, and I can't even see the path to it because it was like, but basically like she presented like not just like millionaire wealth, but like extremely comfortable generation changing wealth based on my creative endeavors. Now, it's still hard for me to imagine that at all because I have not been super successful in the creative field. I've won some contests and writing and things like that, but excuse me. But like very few people make tremendous livings in writing. Like you basically have Stephen King, at least fiction, because she was specific about fiction. But Stephen King, George R. R. Martin, and what's her name, the Harry Potter lady. That's it, right? I mean, there are a few others, but it's very rare. But anyway, I'm running up on the close to the end of the hour, and if this is 1 second over 2 hours, StreamYard won't allow me to live stream it. Okay, it's stupid, but it is what it is. So, thank you. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And I really appreciate all of you being here. So thank you very much. Good day and good night.